Good evening, all, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's story. If you enjoy it, please remember to subscribe and like the video so we can continue bringing you more horror stories. Now, without further ado, take a deep breath and relax as we take a journey through the night. I never paid much attention to Caleb's imaginary friend at first. Every child invents companions to fill the quiet spaces of their world. It was harmless. We all had one. Caleb spoke of someone named Timothy, a name we never taught him, a name that had no connection to any book, show, or person he had ever known. Timothy likes the closet, Caleb told me one night as I tucked him in. He likes the dark. He says it's his favorite place. A shiver trailed down my spine, but I brushed it off with a chuckle. Well, I hope he stays there. No running around at night, all right? Caleb nodded, his tiny face serious. He doesn't like when you tell me that. I hesitated. What do you mean? Caleb turned his gaze toward the closet, his lips pressed into a thin line. He just doesn't like it. I exhaled and kissed his forehead. Get some sleep, kiddo. I checked the closet before leaving the room. Just toys, old clothes, and shadows that stretched further than they should have in the dim glow of the nightlight. A few weeks later, I woke up to the sound of Caleb crying. I bolted out of bed and rushed to his room, my heart hammering in my chest. He was sitting up in bed, clutching his blue Toy Story blanket, his tiny body trembling. What happened? I asked, scanning the room. Caleb pointed at the closet. Timothy was mad. I frowned, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Mad about what? He doesn't like when you close the door all the way. He says he can't breathe. The closet door was open just a crack. I knew for a fact I had closed it completely before putting him to bed. A chill crept down my spine. It's okay, I said, forcing a smile. Timothy is just pretend. He can't be mad. He can't do anything. Caleb's little face scrunched up. He says you shouldn't say that. I glanced at the closet again. My skin prickled. Go back to sleep, bud. It's just a dream. But even as I pulled the blanket over him, I could feel something watching me. The next morning, Caleb had deep scratches on his arms. I nearly dropped my coffee when I saw them. 3 jagged red lines running from his wrist to his elbow, like claws had raked his skin. Caleb! I grabbed his arm, inspecting the marks. What happened? He didn't meet my eyes. Timothy doesn't like when you say he isn't real. My blood ran cold. Did you do this to yourself? Did you scratch yourself in your sleep? He shook his head. I was sleeping. He was mad. A lump formed in my throat. This had gone beyond a child's overactive imagination. I checked the bed, the blankets, nothing sharp. No way he could have done this by accident. I called a doctor, hoping for reassurance, but the answer unsettled me more. Children sometimes act out stress in strange ways. Monitor him closely. If it happens again, we might consider therapy. But Caleb wasn't acting out. He was afraid. That night, I left his closet door wide open. If Timothy liked the dark so much, I'd show him there was nothing there. Caleb seemed uneasy, but didn't argue. I stayed awake long after he drifted off, sitting outside his door, ears straining for any noise. Just as exhaustion began pulling at me, a soft creak echoed from the closet. The door, which I had left open, was now closing. Slowly, deliberately. I jumped up and flicked on the lights. The closet door hung slightly ajar, as if something had paused mid-movement. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, gripping the handle. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes, boxes, and the lingering chill of something unseen. I checked on Caleb, still sleeping, peaceful, unaware. I left the closet open again, sat back down, and waited. Minutes passed. Then very faintly a voice drifted from the darkness inside the closet. Not Caleb's voice. "Close the door." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against me from all sides. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I stayed planted where I was. Caleb stirred in his bed. "Mommy?" I turned to him, my voice shaky. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart. Everything's fine." Another creak. The closet door began to inch shut again, as if unseen hands were guiding it. I lunged forward, pressing it wide open with trembling fingers. "Stay open," I muttered, more to myself than anything else. The silence stretched between me and whatever lurked beyond that door. The air felt charged, humming with something unseen. Then ever so faintly I heard it again. "Close the door." I forced myself to look into the dark space beyond the threshold. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the back wall. The longer I stared, the more I swore I saw something shift in the gloom. "You don't belong here," I whispered. "Leave us alone." If the circumstances had been different, I would have chuckled to myself. There I was talking to my son's imaginary friend. The girls at work would have a heyday if they found out. The response came in a slow exhale, a sound both hollow and full, like air escaping a long-sealed tomb. Caleb whimpered in his bed, curling under his blanket. "Timothy doesn't like when you say that." I wanted to scream, to demand whatever it was to leave. But deep inside, I knew Timothy wasn't something that could be told to go. He had always been here, waiting. The closet door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Caleb cried out, clutching my arm. "Mommy, he's mad." The lights flickered. The air grew icy, my breath visible in the dim glow of the nightlight. The closet door rattled, the handle twisting as if something on the other side was trying to force its way out. I pressed my back against Caleb's bed, heart pounding in my ears. "Stay with me, sweetheart." The door stopped shaking. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My ears strained, waiting, dreading what would come next. Then a slow creak filled the room. The closet door was opening again. Dr. Sam Monroe had spent his life chasing the unseen. Ghosts, spirits, phantoms, whatever name the superstitious gave them, he sought to unravel their mystery through the cold precision of science. After years of clandestine research, he had done it. He had created a serum that peeled back the veil of death, granting human eyes the ability to perceive the departed. He called it Spectratol. The night of the first trial, he stood before a sterile steel table in his dimly lit laboratory. The fluorescent glow of the overhead lamp cast elongated shadows across the room, flickering uncertainly, as if disturbed by unseen forces. The serum, a viscous silver liquid, gleamed in the syringe he held between gloved fingers. He exhaled, then pressed the needle into his forearm, watching as the silver ichor slid beneath his skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a slow, creeping chill unfurled through his veins, winding through his limbs like a sentient frost. The first sign of its efficacy came as a distortion at the periphery of his vision. Shapes flickered at the edges, indistinct and ephemeral. The air thickened, a heavy presence settling into the lab, coiling around him like an invisible serpent. He turned, pulse accelerating, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. They were here. The room, once his sanctuary of logic and experimentation, now seethed with the presence of the deceased. Transparent figures drifted through the walls, their forms wavering like smoke caught in a draft. Some moved with purpose, others with a hollow aimlessness, their eyes vacant voids of inky blackness. He swallowed against the bile rising in his throat. This was beyond anything he had imagined. He had expected to witness echoes of lives past, spectral remnants of people trapped between worlds. But these entities, they were aware. One turned toward him, a woman in a tattered morning gown, her face a cavernous maw of shadow. "You shouldn't see us," she intoned, her voice resonating within his skull rather than the air around him. The others halted their movements, turning their soulless gazes upon him. A ripple of displeasure coursed through them, the air distorting like heat waves on asphalt. Sam staggered backward, heart hammering against his ribs. The figures advanced, their movements jerky and disjointed, as though puppets pulled by unseen strings. Another specter, a towering man in a rotting waistcoat, stepped closer. His jaw hung unnaturally low, unhinged like a serpent preparing to consume its prey. "You've trespassed." Sam grasped at logic, at science, but rationality had abandoned him. He had not merely observed them, he had imposed upon their world, violated an ancient order. A frigid hand clamped around his wrist. Pain shot through him, an unbearable cold sinking into his flesh, gnawing into the marrow of his bones. He cried out, yanking away, but the grip remained, fingers tightening with inhuman strength. He had to reverse this. He stumbled toward his workstation, knocking over vials and papers in his desperation. There had to be a way to neutralize the serum, to restore the blindness that once shielded him from their presence. The specters closed in, their bodies undulating like a tide of darkness. The walls trembled, the very foundation of the lab seeming to reject his intrusion. His fingers found a vial, a hastily prepared counter agent, untested, uncertain. The moment he uncorked it, the spirits recoiled, their forms flickering violently, their silent wails pressing against his skull like knives of ice. He did not hesitate. He swallowed the antidote in one desperate gulp, the acrid liquid burning down his throat. Darkness overtook him. When Sam awoke, the lab was silent once more. The air had lost its unnatural weight. The entities were gone. He sat up slowly, his limbs trembling, his body drenched in cold sweat. A deep ache radiated from his bones, as though something had burrowed into them and made a home within his flesh. Had he undone his mistake? Had the spirits retreated, leaving him in peace? The relief was fleeting. From the corner of the room, a shadow loomed. Not flickering, not wavering, solid. A voice rich with malice coiled through the air. "You think a serum can sever what has been bound?" Sam turned, dread lodging in his throat. The spirit of the man in the waistcoat stood before him, his ghastly form now dense, corporeal, real. "You opened the door," the specter said, grinning, "and now we are here to stay." Sam scrambled backward, knocking over glass beakers that shattered against the cold tile floor. His breath came in frantic bursts as the specter advanced, his grin widening into an abyss of impossibility. "We are no longer fleeting shadows," the man continued, flexing his fingers, now tangible, knotted with sinew and veins as black as void. "You have gifted us substance." The weight of his mistake pressed upon Sam's chest like a leaden stone. If the serum had allowed him to see the dead, then the antidote, had it done the reverse? Had it given them a foothold in his world? Before he could formulate an escape, a hand, solid, flesh-like, yet deathly cold, grasped his ankle. Sam screamed, kicking at the grip, but more hands emerged from the darkness, pressing against his arms, his shoulders, pinning him down. "You will see what it means to be watched," the specter whispered, his voice curling around Sam's mind like tendrils of ice. "You will feel what we have felt." A horrible realization dawned upon him. They would not kill him. Death would be mercy. No, they would make him stay, trapped between realms, unable to turn away from the horrors that lurked in the abyss. The last thing he saw before the lab dissolved into darkness was the widening, endless grin of the man in the waistcoat, and the knowledge that from this moment forward, Sam Monroe would never be alone again. The Sablewood Institute was a place of quiet sterility, tucked away in the fog-laden hills outside the city. A sleep clinic renowned for its experimental treatments, it promised solace to those tormented by relentless insomnia, night terrors, and parasomnias beyond conventional explanation. Patients arrived with hope, clutching the last shreds of their sanity, seeking refuge from the abyss of their own subconscious. Dr. Adrian Smith, the leading neurologist at Sablewood, had pioneered a revolutionary therapy. The program, dubbed Somnex, utilized a proprietary neural synchronization technology, an intricate web of electrodes and neurochemical regulators designed to recalibrate disturbed sleep cycles. The patients, subjected to a coordinated regimen of guided sedation and deep brain stimulation, would finally be granted the solace of restful slumber. The first night of the trial began without incident. 12 participants, each assigned to a sterile, dimly lit chamber, reclined upon soft, hospital-grade mattresses. Electrodes adhered to their temples and scalps, delicate wires trailing from their heads like marionette strings, tethered to unseen puppeteers. A faint hum filled the air as the machines activated, their rhythmic pulsing lulling each patient into unconsciousness. All was peaceful until 2 a.m. when screams and gasps shattered the silence. Monitors flared to life, erratic spikes jagged across the screens like seismic tremors before an impending catastrophe. The medical team rushed in, yet the patients remained locked in their nightmarish states, their bodies rigid, breath hitching in uneven gasps. Their eyes, unseeing yet open, moved wildly beneath their lids, pupils darting as if tracking something unseen, something monstrous. Dr. Smith had witnessed parasomnias before, patients crying out from within their subconscious landscapes, writhing in the grip of a night terror. But this was different. Their movements were synchronized, each patient flinching at precisely the same moments. Recoiling in tandem, their expressions carved from the same sculptor's chisel of horror. It was as if they were dreaming the same nightmare. By dawn, the patients awoke, drenched in cold sweat, their faces ashen. Most refused to speak of what they had seen, their words caught in their throats like thorns. One man, a gaunt figure named Leonard Hayes, finally broke the silence. "There was something in the dark," he murmured, voice brittle. "It knew we were there." Each night that followed unraveled the experiment further. The screams continued, growing more visceral, filled with an anguish that clawed at the walls of the clinic. The shared nightmare did not dissipate with wakefulness. It lingered, its tendrils wrapping around the patient's consciousness even in the daylight hours. They began seeing shadows where none should be, flickering shapes at the periphery of their vision. Sleep became both a necessity and a dreaded inevitability. Fatigue eroded their minds, leaving them vulnerable, minds unraveling like moth-eaten fabric. And then, on the seventh night, one of them did not wake up. Rebecca Vaughn, a woman who had once been a prolific journalist before insomnia consumed her life, lay motionless, her body frozen mid-scream. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared at the ceiling as if something unseen hovered above her. Her skin, once lively, had faded to a pallid gray, as if something had siphoned the very essence from within. The autopsy revealed no physiological cause of death. Her heart had simply stopped. Yet her expression told another story, one of terror so profound, so absolute, that it had eclipsed her body's ability to persist. The remaining patients, now fractured by dread, spoke of a singular presence within their shared nightmare, a figure wreathed in shadow, its form amorphous yet undeniably malevolent. It did not pursue them in the way a beast would hunt prey. Instead, it stood at a distance, watching, waiting. And with each passing night, it came closer. Dr. Smith, though shaken, refused to abandon the trial. Her obsession with understanding the phenomenon surpassed her fear, blinding her to the escalating peril. She adjusted the neural synchronization parameters, convinced she could break the cycle, contain the anomaly that had embedded itself within the patient's subconscious. But the entity had already anchored itself, woven into the fabric of their minds like a parasite burrowed too deep to extract. On the 10th night, 3 more patients perished in their sleep, their bodies found rigid, their mouths contorted into silent screams. The remaining survivors, now barely shadows of the individuals who had arrived, begged to be released, to be severed from the machine, from the nightmare that had taken root in their existence. Yet it was far too late. The figure in the dark was no longer confined to the world of dreams. It had found a way through. Dr. Smith, having deprived herself of sleep in her pursuit of control, finally succumbed to exhaustion. The moment her eyes closed, she was there, inside the nightmare, inside the void that had claimed her patience. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, the kind that suffocates all sound before it can escape. And then she saw it. The figure was no longer distant. It stood before her now, towering and formless, its presence an abyss that swallowed all light. It had no eyes, no features, yet she felt its gaze cold and unyielding. A realization struck her with a force so profound it stole the breath from her lungs. It had never been a dream. The entity had always existed. The machine had not created it. It had merely revealed what had lurked beneath the fragile veil of perception all along. The human mind, in its desperation to rationalize reality, had simply chosen to ignore it. But now, thanks to Somnex, they could see. She would be famous, regarded as the most influential scientist of the 21st century if she was right. But once seen, it could never be unseen. Dr. Smith tried to wake up, clawing at the fabric of the dream, yet the weight of the entity pressed down upon her, paralyzing her limbs. The darkness slithered closer, curling around her like unseen tendrils, sinking into her skin, into her consciousness. Her body convulsed as an unbearable cold seeped into her marrow. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. Back in the waking world, the monitors flatlined. Dr. Smith never woke again. The Sablewood Institute was shuttered after that night, the experiment buried beneath bureaucratic red tape and whispers of unexplained anomalies. The remaining patients, those who survived, would never speak of what transpired within those walls. Some vanished entirely, retreating into the solitude of isolation, fearing sleep itself. But in the dark corners of their minds and the spaces between wakefulness and unconsciousness, they knew the truth. It was still there. It always had been. The estate sale was a collector's paradise, brimming with relics of a bygone era. Dust-furred chandeliers dangled from the ceiling, their crystals refracting the dim light into fractured rainbows. Heavy wooden chests loomed like silent sentinels over tables adorned with porcelain figurines and tarnished silverware. Amidst the relics of wealth long since eroded, Evelyn found the dollhouse. It stood alone on a wobbly table, an exquisite but forgotten treasure. The structure was an exact replica of a Victorian manor, down to its Gothic trim and meticulously carved wooden shutters. Each miniature room held elaborate details: a tiny, velvet-lined chaise lounge in the parlor, an ornate four-poster bed in the master chamber, a dining table set with china so delicate it seemed nearly translucent. It was immaculate, eerily lifelike. The elderly woman overseeing the sale barely glanced at it. $50, she muttered, eyes fixed on counting bills in her wrinkled hands. Evelyn, an antique dealer with an insatiable appreciation for the morbid and obscure, didn't hesitate. The moment her fingers brushed the lacquered roof, a sharp tingle scurried up her arm, cold and electric, as though the dollhouse itself was waking up beneath her touch. Back home, the dollhouse occupied a place of honor on a grand oak table in her study. Evelyn spent hours marveling at its craftsmanship, noting the unsettling realism. The paintings in the hall bore tiny staring eyes that seemed aware of her scrutiny. The kitchen shelves held miniature copper pots, their interiors darkened with something that looked suspiciously like soot. But it was the dolls that sent a sliver of ice down her spine. Each room contained a figure, fixed in an eerie stillness. The master bedroom housed a woman in a lace-trimmed gown, her porcelain face frozen in an expression that wasn't quite serene. A tall man in a black suit lingered near the parlor's fireplace, his eyes mere pinpricks of shadow beneath his painted brows. In the nursery, a child doll sat on the edge of a crib, its cherubic lips slightly parted as though caught mid-sentence. That night, Evelyn awoke to a peculiar sound, the faint, almost imperceptible creak of wood shifting. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she sat up in bed, ears straining. It was nothing. The house settled at night. That was all. Yet when she entered her study the next morning, the dollhouse had changed. The parlor's settee, once pressed against the wall, now angled toward the fireplace, as if someone had enjoyed a quiet evening there. The tiny cradle in the nursery swayed gently, despite the absence of a breeze. But it was the woman in the bedroom that unnerved her the most. Her head, previously tilted downward in a demure pose, now faced the doorway directly, staring at Evelyn. Evelyn swallowed a rising unease and convinced herself that she simply hadn't noticed before. Perhaps in her enthusiasm, she had imagined its movements. But then the cuts began. They started as pinpricks, tiny incisions appearing on her fingertips, thin and precise. She'd wake with shallow scrapes along her forearms, as if she'd brushed against something sharp in her sleep. Then one evening, as she reached into the dollhouse to adjust the woman's placement, she felt an unbearable sting. Yanking her hand back, she found a deep gash along her palm, welling crimson. She inspected the dollhouse with wary fascination, running her gaze over every edge, every furnishing. Nothing should have been sharp enough to cut that deep. And yet, as she examined the tiny dining table, She noticed something that hadn't been there before. A minuscule knife, no longer than a sewing needle, now rested on one of the plates. The blade was smeared with something dark. A tremor of revulsion curled through her. Had it always been there? She couldn't be certain. Then on the third night, she woke to agony. A searing pain bloomed across her calf, hot and stinging. She bolted upright, throwing the covers aside. Her nightgown clung to her skin, damp with sweat and something thicker, blood. A jagged wound ran from her ankle to her knee, deep enough to burn with exposure to air. Heart hammering, she turned toward the study, drawn by an unshakable certainty. The dollhouse was waiting. This time she didn't hesitate. Evelyn grabbed the entire structure, hauling it from the table. It was heavier than it should have been, as though something inside resisted her grasp. Dragging it to the fireplace, she stuffed crumpled newspaper beneath it, hands shaking as she struck a match. Flames curled hungrily around the edges of the dollhouse, licking at the tiny shingles, blackening the ornate trim. For a moment, she thought it was over. Then a cacophony of wailing voices erupted, high and shrill, rattling the windows. The flames contorted, elongating into unnatural shapes, twisted limbs, hollow-eyed faces gnashing in silent fury. The fire recoiled from the structure as if repelled, flickering wildly before extinguishing altogether. The dollhouse stood untouched, unscathed. Evelyn stumbled back. She had no idea how to fight something that refused destruction. By morning, her reflection was a ghost of its former self. Hollowed eyes, pallid skin stretched tight over cheekbones. She had barely slept, every nerve strung tight in anticipation of another attack. The study felt different, heavy with unseen eyes. The dolls had moved again. The woman no longer stood in the bedroom. Instead, she was in the dining room, seated at the head of the table. The man in black loomed behind her, his shadowy eyes darker than before. The child doll had disappeared entirely. A faint scuffing noise pricked her ears. She turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. On the far side of the room, near the doorway, the child doll sat upon the floor, and it was facing her. With an unsteady hand, she reached for the doll, intent on throwing it away, destroying it somehow. But as her fingers brushed its porcelain cheek, she felt something move beneath the surface. A tiny fluttering motion, like something trapped inside. A scream died in her throat. She hurled the doll across the room, where it struck the wall with a sickening crack. Porcelain shards rained onto the floor, revealing the grisly thing nestled within. A human eye, bloodshot, twitching. The moment she saw it, pain erupted in her skull. White hot, searing through her vision. Her knees buckled, and the world lurched sideways. As her consciousness slipped, she caught one final glimpse of the dollhouse. The tiny woman and the tall man were both standing now, facing her. When Evelyn awoke, the world had shifted. She stood inside a grand hallway, lit only by flickering sconces along the walls. The air carried a thick, cloying scent of decay and dust. Heavy drapes lined the windows, muffling any trace of the outside world. Familiar furniture loomed in the dim light. An ornate dining set, a sofa positioned near a silent fireplace. A chilling realization crept over her. She was inside the dollhouse. Paralyzed, she turned toward a gilded mirror hanging above the fireplace. The reflection it cast was not her own. The porcelain face of a doll stared back. The fairground smelled of burnt sugar and oil, a mingling of sweetness and decay that hung heavy beneath the gaudy carnival lights. Colors bled together under the shifting hues of flickering bulbs, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move independent of their owners. Laughter rang out in bursts, yet something about the sound felt off, high-pitched, almost hysterical, as if teetering on the edge of something far less joyful. Ethan, Mallory, Greg, and Diane strolled past the game booths, the metallic jingling of prizes clanking against one another as vendors barked for attention. They had nearly reached the end of the fairground, where the rides gave way to the more obscure attractions, when a deep voice called out from the gloom. "Step up, step up! Test your fate, glimpse the end!" A small wooden booth loomed before them, wedged between a rusted carousel and a darkened funhouse. Unlike the other stalls, no bright signage adorned this one, only a simple peeling banner above the counter that read, "The Oracle's Challenge." Behind the counter stood an old man with sunken eyes, his skin resembling aged parchment, stretched taut over his bones. His grin was too broad, his fingers gnarled like exposed roots. Before him sat a large, ornate contraption, the centerpiece of the booth, a fortune-telling game of sorts, with a tarnished brass lever and a series of numbered slots. Mallory scoffed, folding her arms. "A little outdated for a carnival game, don't you think?" "Looks ancient," Ethan muttered, eyeing the dark wood, its edges carved with symbols he didn't recognize. Greg, ever the skeptic, smirked. "What's the deal? We pull the lever and get some fake prophecy?" His voice carried an edge of amusement, but a shadow of uncertainty lurked in his eyes. The old man chuckled low and dry. "Not fake, not prophecy, truth." Diane shifted on her feet, hesitant. "Truth about what?" "Your demise," the man answered, his grin stretching wider. "Each of you must take a turn. The machine shall grant a vision, and you shall see the manner of your passing." A chill settled over them, the summer heat momentarily forgotten. "That's messed up," Mallory muttered, but her bravado wavered. "It's a joke," Greg said, rolling his eyes. "Probably just spits out some vague nonsense, like a bad horoscope." "Only one way to find out," Ethan said, reaching for the lever. The brass handle felt cold, unnaturally so, as if it had been left outside in the dead of winter. With a firm yank, the machine shuddered to life. Cogs groaned, gears spun, and a slip of yellowed paper emerged from a narrow slot. Ethan grabbed it, his pulse quickening. "Crushed beneath the weight of your sins." The words sent a ripple of unease through the group. "Well, that's dramatic," Greg muttered. "My turn," Mallory said, forcing a grin. She pulled the lever, and the machine coughed up another slip. She hesitated before reading aloud. "Ripped apart by unseen hands." A heavy silence settled over them. Greg swallowed. "Fine. Me next." He yanked the lever, snatching his slip as soon as it appeared. "Drowned in the depths of your own reflection?" Diane shook her head. "This is absurd." "Your turn," the old man said, his gaze fixed upon her. Diane exhaled sharply and pulled the lever, flinching at the machine's rattle. When her slip appeared, she hesitated before finally reading the words aloud. "Devoured from within." A breeze, sudden and unnatural, whispered through the booth, rustling the papers in their hands. The old man's grin never wavered. "Payment has been taken," he said, bowing slightly. "Now we wait." Diane let out a shaky laugh. "This is a scam." "We'll see," the man said. His eyes gleamed beneath the dim lights. They left the booth behind, brushing off the eerie encounter. But as they moved through the fairground, the weight of those predictions clung to them. Ethan awoke to a suffocating pressure in his chest. He gasped, his vision swimming as an invisible force pinned him to his bed. Shadows coiled along the ceiling, unfurling like spectral fingers, pressing down harder. He clawed at his throat, unable to scream as the weight increased. Darkness filled his lungs, heavier and heavier, until his ribs cracked like dry twigs and the world faded to nothing. Mallory's screams shattered the night. Diane and Greg pounded on her apartment door, their frantic knocks going unanswered. When maintenance finally forced their way in, they found the walls streaked with crimson, furniture overturned as if a storm had torn through the room. But Mallory was nowhere to be found. No footprints led out. No signs of forced entry. Only the lingering scent of iron and something far worse. Greg stopped looking in mirrors. It started with brief glimpses, his reflection smirking when he wasn't, then movements out of sync. One night the glass shuddered, the thing in the mirror grinned, reaching out, fingertips pressing against the surface. When Greg tried to turn away, his body refused to obey. His reflection stepped forward. He felt himself dragged inward, sinking into the abyss of his own reflection, lungs burning as water filled his throat. Diane felt it first as a sickness, her stomach churning, her insides twisting. She stopped eating, yet still her belly swelled. The pain became unbearable. Something moved beneath her skin, writhing, shifting. Her screams went unheard. When she collapsed, convulsing, the thing inside her began to tear free. It clawed its way through her, leaving nothing behind but empty, hollow flesh. The fairground closed for the season. The old man's booth remained silent and waiting. A new group would arrive next year. New hands would pull the lever. The oracle never lied.